I'm a 36-year-old guy, and I live by myself in a small town near a larger city. I have my own house that's small, but in a good neighborhood with a lot of outdoor space. I have a large yard that backs onto a wooded area, and when I moved in, the previous owner left some things that I didn't want. There was a big dresser and some other furniture, table and chairs. I already had my own stuff though, so I left it in the basement for a while. Eventually I decided to put the stuff up for sale on Facebook. It was just one ad for all of it. I set my prices low because I wanted to get rid of everything. I didn't think it was worth very much anyway. I posted the ad on a Saturday afternoon, and by the next week, there were still no responses. I didn't worry about it because there was a lot of storage space in my basement, and I wasn't using it for anything else. A few days later, on Monday or Tuesday, I finally got a response from someone. His name was Adam, but surprisingly, he didn't ask me anything about the furniture. His messages were strange. It was like he thought we were friends. The first thing he said was, "Hey man, what's up?" "Good. You interested in anything?" I replied. "I'm just hanging out tonight. How about you?" he wrote. I was confused and kind of thought he was messing with me and wasting my time. I didn't reply after that, but I didn't bother blocking him either since nothing really happened. That was the last thing I saw that day. The next morning, I opened my laptop to check Facebook before work. There was a pile of new messages from Adam. I scanned through them and read a few. The first one I read was an outright threat to my life. I read a few others, and they were all similar. After that, I blocked the account and reported it to Facebook. They sent me an email and told me his account had been removed. I don't think that's the most useful thing, because it's easy enough to create another account. Can't hurt though. After that, I was ready to move on. Like I said, I'm a 36-year-old guy, so I didn't feel particularly worried. People say all kinds of weird things on the internet. That doesn't make it okay by any means, but I didn't feel that any of the threats were credible. Since I didn't get any other responses, I posted the ad with even lower prices and better pictures. At this point, I might as well have made them free, but I decided to still try to get a few bucks out of it for my trouble. If that didn't work, then I would have put them up for free. This time around, I started to get a lot more responses. I don't know if it was something to do with the algorithm or the lower prices, but there was a lot more interest this time. Some people came by to get several of the items. By the end of the week, the only thing that was left was that big dresser that I mentioned earlier. As luck would have it, I got a message on Friday evening from somebody who wanted it. By then, I had knocked down the price all the way to $20. The profile said the guy's name was Ren, like from Ren and Stimpy. I was staying in that night, and Ren wanted to pick it up as soon as possible. I told him that I was around, and we agreed that he would come by at 8 p.m. I gave him my address so he could look it up. Next, I went to the basement to try to carry the dresser up the stairs. I wanted to have it ready for him, but the thing was way too heavy and awkward. I couldn't carry it up the stairs on my own. That was unfortunate, because I really didn't want to be alone with that stranger in my house. I decided to take the risk though. At 8 o'clock, I looked out my front window and saw a dark van pull up to my house. It stopped on my driveway, and a man got out. He was around my age, or maybe a little older. He was bald, and he was a tall, thin guy with a serious look on his face. I went out and greeted him, then led him down to the basement where the dresser was waiting. As we walked down the stairs, I felt a chill. It seemed wrong to be alone down there with a perfect stranger. When we got to the dresser, he took a quick look at it, and turned around to me and said, "Looks good." We lifted it up together and walked over to the stairs. He went on the upside, and I was down. When he was around the top of the stairs, I was still a little over halfway up. Suddenly, he stopped. I stood there holding the heavy dresser, cringing at the uncomfortable position that I was in. I looked up at Ren, and there was a chilling look on his face. I knew right there that I was in trouble. A fraction of a second later, he shoved the dresser down the stairs on top of me. I fell onto my back on the carpeted floor below. The corner of the dresser missed my hip by inches. It didn't crush me on the way down, but it did fall on me afterwards. I wasn't hurt badly, but I was trapped. I knew right then that he did it on purpose. I couldn't see up to where he was, but I could hear his slow, deliberate footsteps coming down towards me. With only seconds to act, I pulled out my phone and dialed 911. The man was closing in. If he got my phone, then I would be screwed. Just in time, 911 answered, and I told them my address, that it was an emergency. and I screamed at the guy that the police were coming. I told him to get out of there while he could. Laying on my back, the dresser was blocking my view of the man, but when I screamed, I heard him turn around and walk away quickly. Once he was gone, I managed to squirm out from under the dresser. I went up the stairs and saw police cars pulling up to my house. We discussed the incident for about half an hour. The officers asked me all kinds of questions, hoping for a lead. That was when I remembered the creeper that messaged me before. I was not able to give them details on him because the account had been deleted. You'd think the police would be able to recover it with help from Facebook, and I don't know if that ever happened or not. The next day, I found out that Ren was caught. Strangely, it turned out that Ren was actually his real name. He was given some pretty serious charges for what he did to me. They told me that he pleaded down from aggravated assault, and that he got a few years behind bars. As for the creep who messaged me before, we never found out if it was the same guy, but for some reason, I really believe that it was. What are the chances that someone threatens you online, and then someone else shows up and actually does it? Seems really unlikely to me. It must have been him. This happened a few months ago. Me and my friend, who we'll call Ryan, were very bored because it was the weekend and we didn't have school. We're both guys, and we tried everything we could think of, but we were still bored. I then mentioned to Ryan that we should go play games at a local arcade and just hang out. But then he mentioned that the closest arcade, where we usually went, was shut down for some kind of health issue, so we couldn't go there. Why don't we just go find a new spot? I said. Ryan looked at me like I had lost my mind, but after a few minutes of begging him, he agreed with me. We both hopped into Ryan's car. He was 19 at the time and could already drive. We drove around for a few minutes until I pointed out an arcade that looked brand new. Ryan then pulled into the parking lot, and we stopped. I got out of the car. I looked around the parking lot and noticed there were a good number of other cars there. Seems popular, I heard Ryan say as he walked next to me. Then we both headed inside, and when I got in, I almost slapped my hands over my ears. The music in that place was so loud that I could feel it shaking in my feet. I wasn't going to complain though, so we both headed up to the front desk and bought the things we needed to play their games. After a minute, we found a table where we could rest in case we got tired of walking around and looking for games to play. We ordered some soda and started chatting. I don't remember everything Ryan said because the place was so loud. But eventually we went and decided to play some games, and then I watched him walk off. I then decided to go off in my own direction. I found a few games to play. Most of the ones that I played were those shooting games, or the ones where you race cars. Then I found a basketball shooting game, and decided to try that one out. I did what I needed to do to start playing, then I threw some basketballs like I was a pro. After the game ended, I felt a tap on my shoulder. I expected it to be Ryan, but when I turned, it wasn't. It was some random guy who looked around 5 years older than me, and I was 18. Something about him seemed off. He was wearing a black beanie, so I couldn't see his hair, but I noticed his eyes were blue. I then noticed that he was wearing a black shirt and blue jeans, and that he had tennis shoes on.
"You play very well,"
the guy said. He pointed at the basketball game, and I told him thank you with a nervous grin on my face. For some reason, the guy was making my danger radar go bonkers. I looked him over once again. He didn't look like he was drunk, and he didn't smell like drugs, but sometimes it doesn't matter. Then I noticed that he'd put his hand on my shoulder. I heard him say whoops before taking it off. Before he could say anything else, I walked away. I looked over my shoulder and noticed that the guy was just standing there, looking at me. I headed back to the table that Ryan had picked out, but I noticed Ryan was still gone. As I was taking sips from my drink, I kept looking around, expecting to see the guy jump out from behind me. A while later, I noticed Ryan walking over to the table. I noticed that his behavior looked different too. He kept looking over his shoulder while he was walking, and he was rubbing his arm, which he does when he's nervous about something. When he sat down on the other side of the table, I noticed that he looked pale, and his eyes seemed to be full of fear. I asked him what happened, and at first, he didn't tell me anything. But then when I asked again, he decided to tell me. He told me that while he was playing the claw machine game, a guy wearing a black beanie walked over to him. At first, the two just started talking about something to each other, but then it got more creepy for Ryan. He told me that the guy touched his hand in a sort of creepy way by rubbing it, and when Ryan asked him to stop, he just winked. Then Ryan noticed that the guy was trying to reach into his pocket. At that point, Ryan said that he had to run off. I gasped, asking Ryan a few things, and then I told him the same man came up to me and started talking weirdly to me also. After that, we decided to leave, and without looking back, we headed back to our car. Before we could drive off, my phone beeped. I looked at Ryan confused before pulling it out. I noticed that it was a Facebook message. I was really new to Facebook, and I had only been on it for a few weeks. When I looked at the message, I nearly dropped my phone to the ground of the car, and Ryan asked me what happened.
Hey, you two. Why didn't you say goodbye before you left?
The message read. Ryan's mouth fell open, and then he asked me who it was. I said I didn't know. I then texted the person and asked who they were and what they wanted. Instead of answering my question, they sent an image. A picture showed up, and it was of the front of Ryan's car. We could even see the shadows of me and Ryan sitting in the car. I then told the person that if they did anything stupid, I was going to call the police. Ryan and I then drove away. We headed back to his house, and after we got there, Ryan asked me to call the police. For some reason, though, I didn't want to call them, and somehow Ryan agreed with me. My story doesn't quite end there, though. A few days after that, I was in a store buying something for my birthday. At some point, I noticed a guy wearing a black beanie. When he saw me looking at him, he winked at me and smiled, and I ran out of the store without buying the thing that I wanted to get. This happened almost 10 years ago, when I moved into my old apartment. I didn't have a lot of stuff, since I'd always been kind of a minimalist. The place came unfurnished, so it was pretty empty at first. During the few weeks after I moved in, I would browse around on Facebook Marketplace to pick up some used furniture for cheap. The things I needed were a desk, end tables, kitchen utensils, dishes, and a bed frame. I was sleeping on a mattress on the floor at the time. One Tuesday night, I noticed a post on Facebook for a set of bowls and plates that looked decent. They were basically new, and the seller only wanted $10. I checked the price and found out that they were over $50 to buy new. Since it was such a good deal, I replied. Moments later, the seller, whose name was Mike, replied. His location was about a 20-minute drive from mine, but we agreed to meet at a gas station parking lot that was partway between us. At 8 p.m. that night, I got into my car and went. When I pulled into the gas station, there was only one other car there. There was a man standing next to it. I parked my car a few spots away and then approached him. He was about 45 years old, and he had a sly smile that I noticed right away. He introduced himself as Mike, but he didn't have the dishes in hand. He made some awkward small talk for a few minutes. I then told him I was new to the area and mentioned all the stuff I was looking for. We then talked about random stuff for about 5 minutes. Eventually, I interrupted and asked to make the trade. He seemed slightly annoyed, but walked over to his car and opened one of the back doors. Then he pointed inside. There was a box on the far seat from the door that was open. Mike asked me to get it since he had bad knees. I was really creeped out at this point, and I didn't trust him. I refused to go into the car, and after a tense 30 seconds or so, he agreed to get them out for me. Mike walked around the car and opened the other door, which was closer to the box. Then he picked it up and brought it around to me. I gave him the money, and I left. Although it was a strange, intense encounter, nothing really happened. It was just creepy. I wish that was the end of it, but it wasn't. A few days later, I was browsing again. There were still some things I needed. More than anything, I wanted an actual bed frame for my bed. Sleeping on the ground was getting old. As I was browsing the ads on Facebook, I saw one for a bed frame that looked pretty good. The picture was clearly just a stock photo from the internet, but the post said that it was in perfect condition. The seller's name was Drew, and the pickup location was not far from my place, maybe a 20-minute drive. I agreed to pick it up from his place that night. I was tied up with some stuff, so I had to go a little later than I wanted. It was 9:30 by the time I hit the road. When I got to Drew's area, it was completely dark. The houses were older there, and large trees sprawled overhead, blocking out what little moonlight there might have been. When I got close to the house, I sent Drew a message to give him a heads up that I would be there soon. When I got to his house, I parked on the street and got out of my car. There was a light on that I could see, so I was pretty sure I was in the right place. I walked up the pathway and up to his porch. As soon as I set foot on the porch, I knocked on the door. Within a few seconds, I heard a voice from the other side of the door.
"Come on in. It's open,"
the voice said. Stupid as it sounds, I reached for the doorknob for a second before talking some sense into myself. I knew better than that. Smart thing to do would have been to walk away right there, but I knocked again, ignoring the voice. This time, I heard a set of footsteps coming up to the door, and then it creaked open. Standing in the doorway was that same guy from before who sold me the dishes. I was confused for a second, because it was not the same Facebook account. The names were different and everything. As soon as we locked eyes, he asked me to come in, not even addressing the fact that we had seen each other before. He gestured with his arm that I should follow him, and then he said,
"I just need a hand with the thing. It's pretty heavy."
No part of me considered going into that guy's house. I didn't say a single word. I just turned around and went back to my car, and I drove home. While I was driving, my phone was blowing up with notifications. Being a responsible driver, I didn't check them until I parked my car. They were all from the Drew account, and all of them were angry messages, one where he threatened to slit my throat. Others were just crazy. The guy was the literal definition of a red flag. Fake names, endless attempts to get me into his car or home, and then those messages to top it off. With those points, I thought it was enough to involve the police. It's not a stretch to think that he would have done something to me if I had gone into his place. The police listened to my story, and they took it all very seriously. It's actually illegal to utter a threat, so even just some of his messages were technically breaking the law. From what I heard, the cops interviewed the guy after I gave him the address. He agreed to let them search the house, but nothing was found. No torture dungeon or anything. After that, they gave him a warning for the threatening messages, and that was the end of it. Although I appreciate what the police did, I still think he was up to more than it seemed. It still gives me chills to think of what would have happened if I went into that guy's house.